The notification letter sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb, and I knew the moment I saw the HOA logo at the top that my Tuesday was about to get significantly worse. I'm Nathan Porter, and I've lived in the Riverside Commons community in Phoenix, Arizona for 3 years now. It's one of those planned developments where every house looks almost identical. The lawns have to be maintained to exact specifications, and the HOA has more rules than the actual city government. I bought my townhouse here because it was affordable and close to my job as a software developer downtown. The HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience at the time. I was so incredibly wrong about that. The letter was dated 2 days ago, which meant I was already behind on whatever absurd demand they were making this time. I unfolded it with the kind of dread usually reserved for jury duty notices or wedding invitations from people you barely remember. Dear Mr. Porter, it has come to our attention that the roof of the community building adjacent to your property has accumulated significant debris, including leaves, branches, and other materials. As per Section 14.7 of the HOA bylaws, homeowners are responsible for maintaining clear roofs on all structures within 50 feet of their property line. You have 5 business days from the date of this letter to clear all debris from the roof or face a fine of $500, with additional daily fines of $100 thereafter. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. The community building, that wasn't my property. That was the HOA's own building where they held their meetings and stored maintenance equipment. How could they possibly claim I was responsible for clearing their roof? I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws, that thick binder they'd given me at closing that I'd barely glanced at. Flipping through to Section 14.7, I found the relevant passage. It was worded in that special way that legal documents are, deliberately vague and confusing. Something about property maintenance responsibilities extending to adjacent structures where said structures may be impacted by vegetation or conditions originating from the homeowner's property. My townhouse did have 2 large pine trees in the small yard. They were there when I bought the place, and I'd actually paid a tree service to trim them just 6 months ago to keep them from getting out of control. But sure, maybe some of my pine needles had ended up on their roof, along with pine needles from every other tree in the entire development. I grabbed my phone and called the management company. After navigating through 4 different menu options, I finally got a human being on the line. Riverside Commons HOA Management, this is Deborah speaking. Hi, Deborah. This is Nathan Porter, Unit 247. I just received a letter saying I need to clear debris from the community building roof, and I think there's been some mistake. Hold please while I pull up your account. Elevator music filled my ear for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes. Yes, Mr. Porter. I see the notice here. The board president, Helen Kingsley, personally filed this after her inspection last week. Of course it was Helen. Helen Kingsley was the HOA president, and the living embodiment of every neighborhood busybody stereotype rolled into one perfectly coiffed, 50-something package. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a Community Pride bumper sticker, and had personally cited me 4 times in the past year for violations including leaving my trash can out 15 minutes past the designated time, having a welcome mat that was burgundy instead of an approved earth tone, parking my car in my own driveway overnight instead of in the garage, and having a package from Amazon sit on my porch for more than 24 hours. Deborah, that's not my building. That's the HOA's community building. How can I be responsible for their roof? According to the bylaws, sir, Homeowners must maintain all structures within the specified radius of their property if the debris originates from their trees. But how do we know it's from my trees specifically? There are trees everywhere in this development. The board president has determined that the debris pattern indicates it came from your property. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Okay, and let's say hypothetically she's right. I'm supposed to get up on a roof and clear it myself. That seems like a liability issue. You can hire a professional service. The work must be completed within the time frame specified in the notice. This is ridiculous. I want to appeal this to the board. You can submit a written appeal request, but it won't stop the clock on the compliance deadline or prevent fines from accruing. I ended the call feeling like I just argued with a brick wall. A brick wall that spoke in corporate customer service phrases and offered no actual help. That evening, I walked over to the community building to see what I was supposedly responsible for. It was a single-story structure painted in the same beige and tan color scheme as every other building in Riverside Commons. The roof was flat, and from the ground, I could see what looked like a collection of pine needles, leaves, and small branches scattered across it. Honestly, it wasn't even that bad. It looked like a roof in autumn, which it was. Admiring your handiwork. I turned to find Helen Kingsley standing behind me, wearing white capri pants and a turquoise blouse, her blonde highlights catching the late afternoon sun. She had her phone in one hand and what looked like a leather-bound planner in the other. "Helen, I got your letter. Good. I'm glad the management company is staying on top of notifications. That roof is a disaster, Nathan. It's a fire hazard and it's unsightly. It's a few pine needles. It's a violation of community standards. Your trees are causing damage to community property." My trees? Helen, there are literally dozens of pine trees in this development. How do you know that debris is from my trees specifically? She gave me that tight-lipped smile that probably made small children cry. I've been president of this HOA for 6 years. I know this community inside and out. The wind patterns, the tree placement, all of it. That debris is clearly from your property. That's not exactly scientific evidence. The bylaws don't require scientific evidence. They require compliance. 5 days, Nathan. The clock is ticking. She walked away before I could respond, her sensible flats clicking on the concrete path. Back at home, I did what any reasonable person in the modern age does when faced with an unreasonable situation. I started Googling. HOA disputes, property responsibility, roof maintenance liability, every combination I could think of. The results were depressing. Apparently, HOAs in Arizona had broad powers, and fighting them was expensive and time-consuming. Most lawyers recommended just paying the fine if it was under $1,000 because legal fees would cost more. But something about this felt wrong. It wasn't just about the money or even the principle of the thing. It was about what came next. If I let Helen force me to maintain their building's roof, what would be next? Would I be responsible for painting it, replacing shingles? Where did it end? I called my insurance agent the next morning. Mike Davidson had handled my homeowner's insurance since I bought the place, and he'd always been straight with me. "Mike, I've got a weird situation with my HOA." "Don't you always?" Mike laughed. He'd heard about some of my previous violations. "What is it this time?" I explained the letter and Helen's demands. Mike was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan, let me get this straight. They want you to maintain the roof of a building you don't own. That's what the letter says. And this building is HOA property. Like the association owns it, correct?" "That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works." I could hear him typing. "Hold on, let me pull up your policy and the association's master policy." More typing, more waiting. I paced my kitchen, coffee getting cold in my hand. Okay, here's the deal. Your homeowner's policy covers your townhouse and your property. The HOA has a master policy that covers common areas and association-owned buildings. That community building would fall under their master policy, not yours. Roof maintenance on their building is absolutely their responsibility, not yours. Even if debris from my trees is on it, even then. Think about it logically. If that were the case, then anytime anything from anyone's property ended up anywhere else, they'd be liable for everything. A leaf from your tree blows onto the street. Are you responsible for street sweeping? No. The entity that owns the property is responsible for maintaining that property. Relief washed over me. So I can just tell them no, you can, but here's where it gets tricky. HOAs can still fine you for bylaw violations, even if those bylaws are questionable. You might have to fight this through their appeals process or even get a lawyer involved. But from an insurance standpoint, from a liability standpoint, this is absolutely not your responsibility. In fact, if you went up on their roof and got injured, you'd be creating a whole nightmare scenario for everyone involved. Can you put that in writing? I'll email you a letter within the hour. It won't be a legal opinion, but it'll be a professional assessment from a licensed insurance agent. Might help with your appeal. True to his word, Mike's email arrived 45 minutes later. I printed out 3 copies, filed one for my records, and prepared to submit one with my written appeal. The appeal form itself was available on the HOA website. It was a 2-page document that required me to state my case in 200 words or less, attach any supporting documentation, and pay a $50 appeal filing fee. The appeal would be heard at the next board meeting, which was fortunately only a week away. I kept my statement concise. I explained that the community building was HOA property, referenced my insurance agent's letter, and noted that requiring homeowners to maintain association property was neither reasonable nor standard practice. I also pointed out that accessing the roof posed safety risks and potential liability issues for all parties involved. I submitted the appeal through the online portal and received an automated confirmation. Then I waited. The next day, I got a call from an unknown local number. "Is this Nathan Porter speaking?" "This is Regina Murphy. I live in Unit 189 and I heard about your situation with the community building roof." "How did you hear about that?" "Helen sent an email to the entire board about your appeal. I'm on the Architectural Review Committee." "Listen, I think what she's doing is completely out of line and I'm not the only one." "Really?" "Helen has been pushing the boundaries of her authority for a while now. Most of us are too busy to fight her on every little thing, so she gets away with it. But this roof thing is too much. If she can force you to maintain association property, none of us are safe. I appreciate the support, but I'm not sure what I can do beyond filing the appeal. Come to the board meeting next week. Bring your evidence, make your case in person. And give a good showing, because there are at least 3 other board members who are getting tired of Helen's overreach. This might be the thing that finally reins her in." The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7. I spent the week preparing, printing additional copies of Mike's letter, documenting everything I could find about property responsibility and HOA master policies. I even found several legal precedents in Arizona where courts had ruled against HOAs in similar situations. Thursday came faster than I expected. I put on business casual clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt, wanting to look professional without overdoing it. The community building where the meeting was held had a large multi-purpose room with a conference table at one end and rows of chairs set up for residents. I arrived 10 minutes early. About 15 other residents were already there, which was apparently a huge turnout based on the surprised looks from the board members as they filed in. Usually, these meetings had maybe 5 attendees, all of them board members and maybe 1 or 2 residents with specific issues. Helen sat at the center of the table, wearing a navy blazer that screamed authority figure. To her left was Regina Murphy, a woman in her early 40s with red hair and a friendly face. To her right was Donald Chen, the treasurer, followed by Martin Foster, the secretary, and Patricia Williams, another at-large member. They all had name placards in front of them. Helen called the meeting to order at exactly 7, going through the standard preliminaries with military precision. Old business, financial report, maintenance updates. Finally, after 25 minutes, she reached new business. We have one appeal to hear this evening. Nathan Porter is appealing a notice to clear debris from the community building roof. Mr. Porter, you have 5 minutes to present your case. I stood up, my printed materials in hand. Thank you. I'm appealing this notice because the community building is association property, not my property. The HOA's master insurance policy covers this building, and maintenance of association property is the association's responsibility, not individual homeowners. I held up Mike's letter. This is a professional assessment from my insurance agent confirming that roof maintenance on an HOA-owned building falls under the association's liability, not mine. Requiring me to access and maintain this roof creates serious safety and liability concerns. Helen's expression hadn't changed. Section 14.7 of the bylaws clearly states that homeowners are responsible for conditions originating from their property. A few pine needles blowing onto a roof isn't creating a condition. It's normal environmental accumulation. By that logic, every homeowner would be responsible for sweeping the streets whenever a leaf falls from their tree. Patricia Williams, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Helen, I have to say, this does seem like a stretch of that bylaw's intent. The bylaw is clear, Helen insisted. Regina leaned forward. Is it though? I've read section 14.7 several times this week, and it's talking about things like overgrown vegetation damaging fences or roots breaking concrete. It's not about normal environmental debris. The interpretation of bylaws is the board president's responsibility, Helen said, her voice getting sharper. Donald Chen cleared his throat. Actually, Helen, major interpretations are supposed to be decided by a board vote. That's in our governing documents. A flush was creeping up Helen's neck. This is a routine maintenance issue. Routine maintenance of association property is handled by our landscape contractor and our maintenance budget, Regina said. We pay them specifically for this kind of thing. The debris is from his trees, Helen said, pointing at me. Maybe some of it, Martin Foster said quietly. He was an older man, probably in his 70s, and this was the first time I'd heard him speak. But Helen, my townhouse is on the other side of the building. I've got 2 pine trees too. So does Margaret and Bill and half the development. How do we know it's specifically from Nathan's trees? I examined the debris pattern, Helen said. You eyeballed it, Regina said flatly. That's not evidence. The room had gotten very quiet. Other residents were watching with obvious interest. This was apparently the most excitement a Riverside Commons HOA meeting had seen in years. Helen's jaw was tight. I move that we uphold the violation notice and require Mr. Porter to comply within the original time frame. I second that we vote on the appeal, Donald said, but I'm voting to overturn the notice. Second, Regina said. Helen looked furious, but she had to follow procedure. All in favor of overturning the notice, Regina, Donald, and Martin raised their hands. Opposed. Helen and Patricia raised their hands. "The motion carries 3-2, Donald said. "The violation notice is overturned." I felt tension I hadn't realized I was carrying drain out of my shoulders. "Thank you." Helen was shuffling papers aggressively. "This meeting is adjourned." "Actually," Regina said, "I'd like to make a motion to have our maintenance contractor clean the community building roof as part of their regular duties, and to implement a quarterly roof cleaning schedule for all association buildings." "I second that," Donald said. They voted, and it passed 4-1, with only Helen opposing. I thanked the board members who'd supported me and headed home, feeling like I'd just won a significant battle. But I should have known Helen wouldn't let it go that easily. 2 days later, I got another letter from the HOA. This one cited me for excessive pine needle accumulation in yard, and demanded I remove all pine needles from my property within 72 hours or face a $250 fine. I stared at the letter in disbelief. My yard was normal. I had trees, therefore I had some pine needles. It was October in Phoenix. This is what happened. I took photos of my yard, then walked around the development taking photos of other yards. Plenty of them had pine needles, leaves, and other natural debris. Some were worse than mine. I called Regina Murphy. "Nathan, hi, what's going on?" I explained the new citation. Regina sighed heavily. "She's retaliating. This is exactly the kind of thing I was worried about. Look, document everything. Take those photos, date them, and file another appeal. And at the next board meeting, I'm going to bring a motion to implement an appeals committee that reviews citations before they go out. Helen has too much unilateral power. Will that pass?" After Thursday's meeting, I think it will. Donald and Martin are both fed up. Patricia's on the fence, but she tends to go with the majority once she sees which way the wind is blowing. I filed the appeal, again with the $50 fee, and continued documenting. I noticed Helen driving slowly past my townhouse several times over the next few days, clearly looking for additional violations. On day 4, I got home from work to find a new notice on my door. This one cited me for having a small crack in my driveway that violated the property appearance standards. The crack was maybe 3 inches long and had been there since before I bought the place. I'd never repaired it because it was minor and cosmetic. I was taking photos of the crack when my neighbor, an older woman named Dorothy who lived 2 units down, walked over. "Helen got you too, huh?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "She's been on a tear since that board meeting. You embarrassed her and now she's out for blood." My friend Susan got cited for having the wrong shade of brown on her front door. Jeff across the way got written up because his house number plaque is 1 inch too large according to some obscure specification. That's insane. That's Helen. She's done this before whenever anyone challenges her. She goes on a citation spree until people back down and apologize. Most folks just pay the fines and kiss the ring because it's easier than fighting. I'm not going to do that. Dorothy smiled. Good. It's about time someone stood up to her properly. Let me know if you need anything. My husband was a lawyer before he retired. He might be willing to give you some advice. Over the next week, I received 3 more citations. One for my mailbox being insufficiently maintained, even though it looked identical to every other mailbox in the development. One for parking my car in my driveway for 15 minutes while I unloaded groceries. And one for having a garden hose visible from the street, which apparently violated the equipment storage policy. Each citation came with a fine ranging from $100 to $300. I appealed every single one, documenting everything meticulously. The appeals were eating into my time and my wallet with all the filing fees, but I was determined not to let Helen bully me into submission. The next board meeting was in 2 weeks. Regina called me to say she was putting together a comprehensive proposal to reform the citation and appeals process. I've been talking to other residents, she said. Helen has cited 17 different people in the past 10 days. That's more than the previous 6 months combined. Everyone knows it's retaliation, and people are angry. Will that be enough to change things? I hope so. I'm also going to move to limit the board president's authority to issue citations without review. And honestly, Nathan, I'm considering running for president in the next election. This has gotten out of hand. The day before the next board meeting, things escalated in a way I never expected. I was at work when I got a call from my home security system. Someone was on my property. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and saw Helen Kingsley in my backyard with a camera, taking photos of my trees. I immediately called her cell phone. I'd gotten the number from the HOA directory. Helen, this is Nathan Porter. You're in my backyard right now. That's trespassing. I'm conducting an inspection of the trees that are causing debris issues in the community. You're trespassing on private property without permission. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. The HOA bylaws give the board right of access for inspections. I pulled up the bylaws on my computer. Right of access with 48 hours written notice except in emergencies. This isn't an emergency and you didn't give notice. Leave now, Helen. I could see her on the camera, standing in my yard with her phone to her ear, clearly debating her options. Finally, she walked back through the side gate, but the damage was done. I saved the security footage and made several backup copies. This wasn't just aggressive HOA enforcement anymore. This was harassment. That evening, Dorothy's husband, Robert, came over. He was a distinguished-looking man in his mid-70s with white hair and sharp eyes. Dorothy told me what's been happening, he said. Mind if I take a look at your documentation? I showed him everything. All the citations, my appeals, the photos, Mike's insurance letter, and the security footage from that afternoon. Robert spent nearly an hour reviewing it all. Finally, he sat back and said, "You've got a harassment case here. The trespassing is the kicker. That crossed a legal line." What do you think I should do? 2 options. First, you could get a lawyer and file a formal complaint, maybe even a restraining order against Helen personally. Second, you could present all this at tomorrow's board meeting and demand the board take action. The first option is more certain but expensive. The second option is risky because you're relying on the other board members to do the right thing. What would you do? I'd go to the board meeting first. Give them one chance to handle this internally. If they don't, then you lawyer up. But based on what Dorothy's been telling me about Regina and the others, I think they'll side with you. Helen has been overstepping for too long, and now she's committed an actual legal violation. The next evening, the community building was packed. Word had spread about the meeting and at least 40 residents showed up. I saw Jeff, Susan, and several others who'd been cited in Helen's recent spree. They all nodded at me when I came in. The energy in the room was different this time. There was tension, anticipation. Helen called the meeting to order, but her usual confidence seemed shaken by the turnout. She rushed through the preliminaries, clearly wanting to get to the appeals. Regina interrupted during the treasurer's report. "Helen, before we get to appeals, I need to address a serious matter. I've received multiple complaints about an excessive number of citations issued in the past 2 weeks and allegations of harassment against several residents." "I've been enforcing the bylaws," Helen said stiffly. "You've cited 17 residents in 10 days. That's more than we've cited in entire quarters before. And yesterday, you entered Nathan Porter's property without notice or permission." Murmurs went through the crowd. "I was conducting an inspection," Helen said. "Without required notice," Regina said. That's trespassing. Nathan has it on video. Donald Chen looked shocked. Helen, is this true? The bylaws give us access rights, Helen insisted, but her voice had lost its authority. With notice, Martin Foster said, looking at his copy of the bylaws. 48 hours written notice except for emergencies. Was there an emergency? Helen didn't answer. Regina continued. I move that we immediately suspend all citations issued in the past 2 weeks and conduct a comprehensive review of the citation process. Furthermore, I move that we implement mandatory review procedures before any citation can be issued, requiring at least 2 board members to approve. I second, Donald said immediately. This is a witch hunt, Helen said, her voice rising. I've been protecting this community's property values for 6 years, and this is how you thank me. By trespassing on private property. Regina's voice was calm but firm. By retaliating against residents who exercise their right to appeal. That's not protecting the community, Helen. That's abuse of power. Patricia Williams, who'd been quiet, finally spoke. I have to agree with Regina. Helen, I've supported you on a lot of things, but this has gone too far. The vote on Regina's motion was 4-1, with only Helen opposing. Then Martin made a motion that surprised everyone. I move that we remove Helen Kingsley as board president for violation of her fiduciary duties and conduct unbecoming of a board officer. The room went dead silent. You can't do that, Helen said, her face pale. Actually, we can, Donald said quietly. It's in the governing documents. A board vote can remove an officer for cause. This is ridiculous, over some pine needles. This is about a pattern of behavior, Regina said. The roof incident wasn't an isolated thing. It was the most visible symptom of a larger problem. They voted. 4-1, Helen was removed as president. I quit the board entirely then, Helen said, standing up and gathering her papers. You're all making a huge mistake. This community will fall apart without proper leadership. She stormed out and the room erupted in conversation. Regina banged the gavel. Order, please. We need to elect a new president pro tem for the remainder of the meeting. They elected Regina, who handled the rest of the meeting with efficient grace. All of my appeals were approved unanimously. The other residents who'd been cited had their violations overturned as well. After the meeting, several people thanked me for standing up to Helen. Jeff shook my hand and said, I've been here 8 years and never had the guts to fight her. I'm glad you did. I thought that was the end of it. Helen was off the board, the citations were overturned, and life could return to normal. But 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter. It was from a law firm in Scottsdale. Helen Kingsley was suing me personally for defamation, claiming that my statements at the board meetings and to other residents had damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I stared at the lawsuit papers in shock. This had just become a lot more serious. I called Robert immediately. Can she actually do this? I asked. She can file anything she wants. Whether it'll succeed is another question. Everything you said was either documented fact or stated in a public meeting about community business. That's going to be a hard defamation case for her to win. But I still need a lawyer, right? You need a lawyer. Let me make some calls. Robert connected me with a lawyer he'd worked with, Jennifer Matthews, who specialized in HOA disputes and civil litigation. She agreed to take my case after reviewing all the documentation. This is a slap suit, Jennifer said at our first meeting. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's trying to intimidate you and punish you for speaking up. Arizona has anti-slap provisions. We can file a motion to dismiss, and if we win, she'll have to pay your legal fees. And if we don't win, Then we go to trial, but honestly, she doesn't have a case. You made factual statements in an appropriate forum. That's protected speech. Jennifer filed the motion to dismiss, and we had a hearing scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, life at Riverside Commons had improved dramatically. Regina was doing a good job as interim president. The new citation review process meant that only legitimate violations were being addressed, and they were handled with common sense rather than militant enforcement. Helen, however, wasn't letting go. She showed up at the next board meeting, not as a member but as a resident, and attempted to speak during the public comment period. She claimed the board was mismanaging the community and that property values were declining under Regina's leadership. Property values are actually up slightly this quarter, Donald said, showing the recent comparable sales data. And we've had 0 legal complaints, which is an improvement from previous quarters. Helen left the meeting red-faced and angry. The hearing for the motion to dismiss was held in Maricopa County Superior Court. I wore my best suit and tried not to be nervous. Jennifer was confident, but I'd never been involved in litigation before. Helen's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Foster, who looked like he'd be more at home in corporate litigation than HOA disputes, argued that I'd made false and damaging statements about his client. Jennifer systematically dismantled his arguments. She presented the security footage of Helen trespassing. She showed the documented evidence of the excessive citations. She referenced the board meeting minutes where everything was recorded officially. "Your Honor," Jennifer said, "Mr. Porter made factual statements about matters of public concern in an appropriate public forum. This suit is clearly retaliatory and intended to chill protected speech. Not only should it be dismissed, but sanctions should be awarded." The judge, a middle-aged woman named Judge Carolyn Pierce, reviewed the materials and asked a few pointed questions. Then she made her ruling. "I'm granting the motion to dismiss. The plaintiff has failed to show any false statements of fact. Furthermore, I'm finding this to be a slap suit and awarding attorney's fees and costs to the defendant. Miss Kingsley, you have the right to appeal, but I strongly advise you to let this matter drop. Mr. Porter acted appropriately in addressing legitimate community concerns." I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in weeks, but Helen's lawyer filed an appeal anyway. Jennifer assured me it was just posturing, that the appeal would fail, but it meant more waiting and more uncertainty. During this time, something else happened at Riverside Commons. During a routine inspection of the community building, they discovered that the roof had been neglected for years and had significant water damage. The flat roof design had drainage issues, and years of improper maintenance had led to leaks and structural problems. The repair estimate came back at $75,000. At the board meeting where this was announced, Regina made an interesting point. If Helen had actually been maintaining association property properly instead of trying to force homeowners to do it, we might have caught this years ago before it got this bad. An emergency special assessment was voted on to cover the repairs. Every homeowner would have to pay their share, about $400 each. Several residents grumbled about it, but Dorothy's voice carried across the room. "At least now we have a board that's actually taking responsibility for association property instead of trying to shirk it off on individual homeowners." There were murmurs of agreement. Helen attended that meeting too, sitting in the back row. When the assessment was announced, she stood up. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent, if you'd all just maintained things properly." "You mean if you'd maintained association property like you were supposed to?" Regina interrupted. "The roof was the HOA's responsibility, Helen. It always was." That's what our master insurance policy covers, and that's what our maintenance budget is for. This damage happened because proper maintenance wasn't being done, not because homeowners weren't clearing pine needles. Helen left without another word. The appeal of the lawsuit dismissal was heard 3 months later. The appellate court upheld the lower court's ruling in a brief written opinion that basically said the trial court got it right, and there was no basis for appeal. Helen was ordered to pay an additional $10,000 to cover the costs of the appeal. Jennifer called me with the news. It's over. Completely over. She can't appeal again. And between the attorney's fees and the appeal costs, she's out about $35,000. I almost feel bad for her, I said. Don't. She brought this on herself. She could have accepted the board's decision and moved on. Instead, she doubled down and filed a baseless lawsuit. I thought that would be the true end of it, but there was one more twist. A month after the appeal ruling, Regina called me. Nathan, you need to come to an emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Something's come up with Helen. What now? I can't say over the phone. Just trust me, you want to be there. The next evening, I showed up to find a different kind of crowd. The board was there, along with about a dozen other residents, but there were also 2 people I didn't recognize. A man and woman in business attire who looked official. Regina called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I've asked these representatives from the management company to present some findings they've discovered during their audit of HOA finances. The woman, who introduced herself as Andrea Lopez, opened a laptop. During our routine annual audit, we discovered some irregularities in the HOA accounts. Specifically, there were a number of expense reimbursements to the former board president, Helen Kingsley, that lacked proper documentation. My stomach dropped. Andrea continued. Over the past 3 years, Miss Kingsley submitted and approved her own reimbursements totaling approximately $43,000. Some of these were legitimate HOA expenses, but many appear to be personal expenses incorrectly classified as association business. Donald Chen looked sick. How did this happen? The board president had signatory authority on accounts and could approve reimbursements without secondary approval. Miss Kingsley appears to have taken advantage of that system. That's embezzlement, someone said from the crowd. That's exactly what it is, Andrea said. We've reported it to our legal department, and they're recommending the board file a police report and pursue recovery of the funds. Regina looked around the table. I move that we authorize the management company to file a police report and take all necessary legal action to recover the misappropriated funds. The vote was unanimous. 2 weeks later, Helen Kingsley was arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. The local news covered it, and it became a cautionary tale about HOA oversight and the importance of financial controls. I watched the news report with mixed feelings. I'd never set out to destroy anyone's life. I just wanted to not be responsible for cleaning a roof that wasn't mine. But Helen's response to being challenged had revealed something darker, a willingness to abuse power, retaliate against residents, and apparently steal community funds. The investigation revealed that Helen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses for years. Dinners at expensive restaurants claimed as board business meetings with no other attendees. Shopping trips labeled as supplies purchases without receipts. Even a vacation to San Diego that she'd somehow categorized as community development research. She eventually pleaded guilty to avoid trial. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered to make full restitution of the embezzled funds plus interest. Her lawyer argued for probation only, claiming she'd already suffered enough with the public humiliation and financial losses from the lawsuit. The judge wasn't sympathetic. You held a position of trust in your community, and you violated that trust repeatedly. You stole from your neighbors, and when challenged about your behavior, you retaliated and attempted to use the legal system to silence a whistleblower. The court cannot overlook such serious breaches of duty. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When Helen was led out after the judge's ruling, she looked at me. I expected anger, but what I saw was resignation and defeat. Life at Riverside Commons improved dramatically after everything settled. Regina was elected as the permanent board president in the next regular election, running unopposed. She implemented reforms that included mandatory dual approval for all expenditures, regular financial audits, and a citizen oversight committee. The citation process was completely overhauled. Now, before any violation notice could be issued, it had to be reviewed by at least 2 board members and documented with photographic evidence. Residents had a streamlined appeals process with no filing fees. And there was a new policy requiring board approval before any trespassing or property inspections beyond visible street view observations. The community building roof was repaired, and a quarterly maintenance schedule was implemented for all association property. Ironically, the contractor they hired cleared debris from all the roofs regularly, including whatever pine needles might have blown from my trees or anyone else's. My legal fees were partially covered by the judgment against Helen, though I still ended up out of pocket about $5,000 when all was said and done. It was worth it, though, not for revenge or vindication, but because it led to real positive change in the community. Dorothy and Robert became good friends. We'd have dinner together once a month, and they'd tell stories about their legal career and travels. Dorothy confided that she'd been wanting someone to stand up to Helen for years, but hadn't had the courage herself. "You did what a lot of us wanted to do but couldn't," she said. "You made this a better place to live." Mike, my insurance agent, got a kick out of how his simple letter had sparked such a chain of events. "I just told you the truth about liability and coverage," he said. "I had no idea it would lead to embezzlement charges and HOA reform." "Neither did I admitted. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept meticulous records, taken photos, and saved every communication, things could have gone very differently. Second, standing up to bullies matters even when it's scary and expensive. Helen had gotten away with her behavior for years because most people found it easier to just comply than to fight. Third, systems need checks and balances. Giving any one person too much unilateral power, even in something as mundane as an HOA, creates opportunities for abuse. But maybe the most important lesson was about community. When I'd first moved to Riverside Commons, I'd viewed it as just a place to live, a collection of houses that happened to be near each other. The whole situation with Helen forced me to engage with my neighbors, to work together toward common goals, to actually build relationships. A year after Helen's sentencing, the community threw a summer barbecue at the renovated community building. It was Regina's idea, a way to celebrate the improvements and bring everyone together. Over 100 residents showed up, far more than had ever attended any HOA event before. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, when Regina came over with a beer for me. "Thanks for everything, Nathan. Seriously, if you hadn't pushed back on that roof thing, who knows how much longer Helen would have gotten away with everything. I just didn't want to clean a roof that wasn't mine," I said. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of resistance." We stood there watching families playing on the lawn, kids running around, neighbors talking and laughing. The community building behind us had a clean roof, properly maintained by professionals. My trees still dropped pine needles occasionally, and nobody cared because that's what trees do. Jeff walked over with his family. "Nathan, my kids want to thank you for making our neighborhood better." His daughter, who looked about 10, said, "My mom says you were brave." "I don't know about brave," I said. "I just asked some questions and didn't take no for an answer." "That's what brave is," she said matter-of-factly, then ran off to join the other kids. As the sun set over Phoenix and the party continued into the evening, I reflected on the past year and a half. It had been stressful, expensive, and at times overwhelming. But standing there in a community that was genuinely stronger and more united than before, I knew it had been worth it. The next morning, I was having coffee on my small patio when I noticed pine needles on the ground. I smiled, left them where they were, and went inside to start my weekend. Nobody was going to cite me for it. Nobody was going to demand I clean someone else's roof, and the trees would keep doing what trees do. Sometimes the most important victories aren't about winning, they're about establishing what's right and what's fair. The HOA had demanded I clear their roof. My insurance agent had said that was their responsibility, not mine. And in the end, the truth of that simple fact had been enough to tear down a corrupt system and build something better in its place. I still live in Riverside Commons. The HOA still exists, but it functions the way it should now. Protecting property values and maintaining common areas without harassing residents or overstepping boundaries. Regina's been president for 3 years now, and the community consistently ranks high in satisfaction surveys. Helen got out of prison after serving 14 months. I heard she moved to California to live with her sister. I've never seen her again, and I'm fine with that. I don't harbor anger toward her anymore. I just hope she learned something from the experience. As for me, I learned to pay attention to HOA bylaws, to question authority when something doesn't seem right, and to value the community of neighbors who'll stand with you when things get tough. I also learned that insurance agents give excellent advice. Documentation is your best friend in any dispute, and that sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to fight even when it would be easier to give in. The community building's roof is scheduled for inspection next month. The maintenance contractor will handle it, as they should. My trees are still there, still dropping pine needles sometimes, still providing shade in the Arizona heat. And life in Riverside Commons goes on, better than before, because someone finally said no when they should have and meant it.